and welcome to the KnitandGrace podcast. Let's talk about the Hibernate Pullover. Hello and welcome back if you're a returning viewer. If you are new here, my name is Mia and I am the maker behind KnitandGrace. And on this corner of the internet, I like to get up to all things fiber related, primarily knitting, but I do quite a bit of sewing and occasionally a bit of crochet as well. I put out videos in the traditional project recap style, making journals, as well as fiber travel vlogs, and I am passionate about making clothing that fits you no matter what size you might be. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, grab a cup of something cozy, click that subscribe button, and let's settle in for today's episode. So today I will be sharing a project spotlight episode. I don't do too many of these, but I do put them out every so often, specifically when I am test knitting a project that is soon to be, or in this case is released today when you are seeing this. And the project we will be spotlighting is the Hibernate Pullover by Aimee. I had the pleasure of recently testing this beautiful pullover for Aimee, and I wanted to share it with you all, specifically because I have not made it once, I have not made it twice, but now I've made it 3 times. So I wanted to share with you those projects, a little bit more about the project itself in terms of the pattern, what you can expect when you purchase it, and also give you a little bit of a recap of the testing process for Aimee if you are ever interested in potentially signing up for one of their test knits. So with that all, we will go ahead and jump right in and we can talk about the pattern itself. And so as always, I should mention I will have timestamps down below so that you can skip around if you are interested in just seeing a particular project or seeing a particular part of the episode today. And if I look down, as always, I'm looking down at my notes. So the Hibernate Pullover, again, is a pattern by Aimee. It is released today if you are watching this on September 24th when it is released. And it is a beautiful, beautiful pattern. It is a top-down sweater, so it is worked top-down in one piece seamlessly. You start the sweater flat because it is a V-neck. It has a modest V-neck. I'm actually wearing the slightly sassy V, which is the spring-summer version of this pattern. And so you can see it has a modest V-neck. So you start the pattern out flat, increasing along the raglan as well as the front neck bands. It does feature a compound raglan, so it's going to hug your shoulders really nicely and give you a nice raglan depth without being too deep, which is important especially with winter objects so that they fit under your winter clothing. And as always, Aimee provides many different modification options within the pattern itself. So the pattern itself actually features a very mild A-line shaping to accommodate for hips, but you can choose to omit this and they walk you through that process. There's also the option of color blocking if you choose to color block. And then of course, like with all knitted patterns, you can lengthen, shorten according to your needs with regard to either the body, the sleeves, the ribbing, etc. The pattern is designed in either a fluffy yarn, so like a lace weight mohair or a suri held together with a fingering weight. However, you can hold a DK weight single for a different type of feeling fabric, maybe a little bit of a more airy fabric with a little bit less structure. And the pattern itself is designed to fit 10 different sizes, and the patterns, or all of Aimee's patterns, I should say, are designed based on your upper bust measurement. So the upper bust measurement for this pattern is 31 inches to 60.25 inches. And that's going to give you a finished bust measurement of 35 inches to 71.25 inches, so 75 1/4. So depending on the type of fit that you would like, you can knit this pattern with anywhere between 1 to 5 inches of positive ease. As always with all of their patterns, they are shape inclusive, so you have optional bust darts that are written into the pattern, so you don't have to do any of your own math if that's something that you're interested in adding into the pattern. The pattern itself does feature 2-inch difference between the front and the back that's already built in. So if you have anything more than that 2-inch difference when it comes to your bust line, you can add in those bust darts. And I believe they start at 1 inches all the way up to 4 inches if I remember correctly. The gauge for the pattern is 21 stitches by 28 rounds is going to give you a 4-inch square. And so that should actually be either 28 rounds or 28 rows, because you do want to make sure that you get the same gauge whether you're knitting flat or in the round, since you are starting out flat for a portion of the pattern and then ultimately you are joining in the rounds. And yeah, in terms of the pattern layout itself, so if you've never knit any of Aimee's patterns, they do feature a 2-column layout, which makes it very easy to read and follow your instructions. There are also helpful links within the pattern, so you can jump around within the pattern easily. Let's say if you are choosing to add in bust darts or omitting bust darts and such, you can easily jump around the pattern depending on what section you need to work next. There is a detailed schematics page, which Aimee actually does offer, even regardless if you buy the pattern or not. So you can definitely check out if you think that the schematics will work for you. But there's very detailed schematics with regard to not only things like your armhole depth and your arm circumference and body circumference and all of that, but there's also different indicators with regard to, you know, how wide the neck is, you know, your body length, your sleeve length, all of that kind of stuff. So super, super detailed schematics, and the schematics are based on which of the views you choose to knit. Or actually, no, this pattern only has one view. I'm thinking about other of their patterns that have multiple views. So this pattern technically only has the one view, which does feature that slight A-line shaping. But again, you can eliminate that if that is not something that you need within your own patterns. In terms of the pattern layout, again, one feature that I absolutely love about their patterns that are raglan, especially compound raglan, is that they offer a raglan tracker. So each size will have a spreadsheet that you can print out, a PDF spreadsheet that you can print out and mark off as you work the pattern. So actually, essentially, once you set up your raglan, you don't even have to look at the pattern anymore for the most part until you're finished with your raglan shaping, since the raglan chart will sort of help you with that. And then it also just helps you keep track of not only what row you're on, but also where exactly in the raglan shaping you're in. And as I mentioned, there are modification ideas, and they do offer a coloring page if you want to do a color block version. And there's also a helpful printing guide if you're someone that likes to print your patterns and maybe only want to print certain sections of the pattern so that you don't waste paper or ink or whatnot, since the patterns do jam pack a lot of information in there. So I would say that they're not extremely lengthy. I've definitely seen pattern designers put out many more or much longer patterns. But there is a bit of length to it because they do offer a lot of modifications. So they also offer you a very helpful printing guide if you want to actually print out the pattern for yourself. So yeah, I mean, I think that that is a lot of information. I feel like I'm talking very quickly today, so hopefully you were able to catch all of that. And just looking down at my notes, I think that I covered everything with regard to the pattern itself. Or I guess the one thing that I did mention that it's worked top down seamlessly, but I didn't necessarily go into the specifics. So again, you start the pattern off flat because it is a V-neck, so you're working in rows back and forth until almost you join in the front of the neckline, or until you join in the front of the neckline. Then you're working still a few more rows. Depending on your size, you could either split for sleeves before or after the V-neck, depending on what size you're on. The size that I knit, I actually ended up splitting for sleeves just after the V-neck. So you join in the round, you split for sleeves, you work the body, then you work the sleeves. And of course, because you're working top down, you can always try the pattern or the project on as you go to make sure that you're getting the perfect fit for you. So with that, I will talk about my 3 projects. I had initially only intended on talking about 2 of them, but I was actually able to finish the 3rd one right as I was getting ready to film this video. So that one's not blocked. I don't have pictures of it, so I'll leave it for last. And I did do quite a bit more modifications than I did on the other ones on the 3rd one, which I'll talk about. But I'll go ahead and start with the first 2 versions that I made. And I should mention, as always, all of the information will be linked below. So both to Aimee's website, to my project pages, so you can see them on Ravelry and find any more information. But I always like to share it all with you here in case Ravelry is not accessible to you, so you have a different format of seeing that information. And of course, you can always visit my other socials to check that out. But in terms of the sizing, so I knit my usual Aimee Shirt Makes size, which is going to be a size D or the 4th size with a 2-inch bust dart. So again, the pattern does have 2 inches built in, so I need an additional 2 inches since I have a 4-inch difference between the length of my shoulder to my front versus my shoulder to my back in terms of my armhole placing or my armhole depth. So I need an extra 4 inches, so I always knit a 2-inch bust dart. So that's kind of the standard, which is really great when, and I think that you all will have noticed that I knit Aimee Shirt patterns over and over and over. And one of the reasons is not only because they make such well-designed patterns, but because I know that their sizing works perfectly for me and I don't have to modify anything, even with regard to like the bust dart depth actually is the exact bust dart depth that I need for my body. So I kind of just like, once I get gauge, I just follow the pattern and I don't have to think about anything else, which is really great when you find a designer that really works for you. So yes, so again, I knit the size D with a 2-inch bust dart, and the size D corresponds to a upper bust measurement of 40.75 inches, or 40 and 3/4 inches. And for reference, my upper bust is 41 inches. My full bust is 46 inches. In case you were wondering, my under bust is about 37 inches. So that kind of gives you an idea of my measurements. With regard to the body, I am a teeny tiny little person. I'm only 4'11" and a half. And so I do usually have to crop patterns to make sure that they fit me, my body, especially because I actually do have short torso, long legs, versus someone like Aimee. They have like a longer torso. So, you know, obviously designers are designing patterns for different measurements, different body measurements, whether it's their own or standard body measurements. So I usually always have to shorten the body as well as the sleeves. So I did shorten the body, and I'll give you basic measurements, which are also in my Ravelry project pages. And then if you purchase the pattern, you will be able to determine, based on the measurements that I'm giving you, how I adjusted the pattern. So I'm not going to give you, you know, how long you have to knit and all of that in the pattern. That you will get if you buy the pattern. But in terms of my body, I did shorten it, and I only knit for 7 inches before doing the ribbing. The pattern does feature a pretty deep rib on the body with a slightly shorter rib on the sleeves, and I still wanted that very deep 4-inch ribbing. So I shortened the body a little bit more, and I left the ribbing exactly the same as it calls for in the pattern. So that's going to give me what a finished underarm to hem of 11 inches, which gives me a high hip measurement. If I want something that fits me full length, I'm usually at about 13 inches. And if I want something that hits me cropped, I'm usually, depending on how cropped I want something, I usually knit anywhere between 8.5 to 10 inches. And so that's kind of something really great about knowing your body measurements, knowing your preferred measurements. And actually, I'll link a video that my friend Stephanie of Edible Thoughts made about knowing your magic numbers in the description box below, in case you want to check that out, in terms of knowing exactly how to knit something without, you know, the length and all of that kind of stuff, without having to do too much trying on or, you know, too much planning out before you start knitting a project. Okay, I've never had to do a battery change so early in the video. Hopefully that doesn't mean that I was talking for too long, but hopefully you're in the same position. So as I mentioned, I knit the size D with a 2-inch bust dart, and I knit the body for 7 inches. I did also shorten the sleeves. I don't remember how many inches. I didn't quite catch the number of inches. I think it was something like 3 inches that I shortened the sleeves by. And the way that I did this was I followed the instructions through the, so it does have a slightly tapered sleeve. So I followed the instructions through the first set of decreases, and then I worked the second set of decreases a little bit more rapidly than called for in the pattern. So I knit those decreases every 7 rounds, and then I went straight into the ribbing after I finished my decreases. And so that's how I ended up shortening the sleeves. And if I do recall correctly, it is by 3 inches that I shortened the sleeves. So that gives you the basic information on the 2 first versions that I'm going to show you. The third version I did modify a little bit more, so I'll talk about that when I get to that. But I'll go ahead and show you the one that I finished first, which I have here. It is a little wrinkled. It's just now cooled down enough that I can start wearing sweaters again, so I'm really excited. So this has been folded up since our trip to the Pacific Northwest about I get over a month ago now, because we went out to the West and we had really beautiful weather, what I consider fall weather, and then we came back to the Northeast, back to summer weather. So the first version that I have to show you all, and of course, like always, I'm kind of really close to the camera, so you're not going to be able to see it all, but I will go ahead and insert pictures as always here so that you can see them. But this first version that I knit is, it's funny because so as I mentioned, I've knit the Slightly Sassy V, and I knew just because of being friendly with Aimee that they were planning a sort of DK winter version of the pattern. And so last year during Pearl Soho's Black Friday sales, I actually picked up enough Goodwill knowing that I wanted to knit this pattern this year. And this was kind of also me thinking like, oh, I'm not going to be buying yarn in 2024. Famous last words. So I did have this in stash already. And so I kind of was like, okay, well, I'm going to be good. I'm going to use my stash yarn and I'm going to go ahead and swatch and cast on. So again, this is Pearl Soho Goodwill. The color is called Olive Oil, which is a very out there color for me personally. I think it actually suits me really well. And I'm starting to get into the greens a little bit this season. So I'm kind of really actually taking inspiration from my sister. My sister really loves her deep hunter greens and just like olive greens and all of that kind of stuff. I will admit that my ring is stuck in my knitting. I will admit that when this came in, the green was a little bit brighter than I thought in terms of what it looked like on my screen, but I absolutely love it. Let me see if I can show you all. Goodwill has this really beautiful heather, and I want to say that all of their colors features that really beautiful heather. And it's just a really great, inexpensive wool. I believe it is Highland wool, and it is a sport weight. So technically it is a little bit thinner than the yarn that the pattern would call for. I believe, if I remember correctly, the recommended gauge for Goodwill is between 22 to 24 stitches to 4 inches, and I knit this at 21 stitches to 4 inches. And so by doing that, that gave me a really, really airy gauge and really, really airy fabric. However, it is still completely opaque. So if I were to stick my hand in here, you can't actually see my hand, but you can see how flowy and drapey this fabric is, and I absolutely love that. This actually gives me more of a little bit of a sweatshirt vibe, and I kind of took that into account when I took pictures of this, where I did kind of wear it or style it, I should say, the way that I would style a fall sweatshirt, which is usually with my shorts and a sweatshirt. When you have those days that are cool and you still, the temperature still fluctuates. I'm someone whose torso runs cold, my legs run hot, and so I usually am the person who's walking around in shorts and sandals and a sweatshirt. So that's kind of how I chose to style the pictures for this, and that's the feel that it gave me, because it is that sort of looser gauge, that flowy fabric. It gives you kind of more of that relaxed look and feel. And so I have my second version, which, of course, when you're testing a pattern, even if you have yarn in stash, or I guess I shouldn't say of course, but for me, even if I have yarn in stash, I'm still going to peruse the websites and look at the yarn that's recommended or look at other yarns. And I absolutely fell in love with this combo. And the funny thing is that I didn't realize that I had actually also had some of this yarn in stash for a different project that I'd never finished, which I'm hoping to pick back up this fall. And I was like, well, that makes sense why I love this color. But I actually ended up knitting my second sample a little bit more similarly to the way that the pattern is designed. And the reason I say that is because I did use a fluffy lace weight yarn held with a fingering weight yarn. And so for my second version, I knit this in Knitting for Olive in the color Plum Rose. And again, I'll go ahead and insert those pictures for you all so that you can all see what this looks like on. I'm actually going to be taking pictures of this after I film this video, and I'll insert them after the fact before the video goes live. But yeah, this was my second version. And so I fell in love with this color, and after a lot of hemming and hawing, I was like, I need this color in my life. It's the perfect fall color. Y'all know, I think that pink is a neutral, especially this pink. So I was like, I need this color in my life because it just looks so good on me. And I need a second version. And so again, this is knitting for Olive. So I use the soft silk mohair held together with the merino, which is fingering weight in the color Plum Rose. This is knit at a slightly tighter gauge for a little bit more structure. So you can see it's still flowy, but it's not going to be as flowy as the Pearl Soho version. And I just realized that I didn't tell you the needles that I used. So I mentioned the gauge for the pattern at the top of the episode, but I don't think I mentioned the gauge that they used, which is, or the needle that they used. So the gauge for the pattern, again, is 21 stitches to 28 rounds or rows is going to give you 4 inches on US 6 or 4mm needles. For my Pearl Soho version, because I was using sport weight yarn, I did need to size up. So I used a size 7 or a 4.5mm needle for that version. And then for my Knitting for Olive version, ironically, I'm usually spot on gauge when it comes to Aimee's gauge. However, I think that the pattern was originally, I forgot the yarn that they originally used. The fingering weight, I think, is a slightly, very slightly thinner than the Knitting for Olive merino. So I did have to size down very, very slightly. And I actually, funny enough, I got gauge on the US 6 unblocked, but then when I blocked it, the swatch did bloom. So it's actually a very good thing to remind you all, if you're not already washing your swatches, you have to wash your swatch. Because if you get gauge and then you wash it and then it blooms and you didn't wash your swatch and you knit a whole sweater and then it blooms, it's going to be too big on you. So like I mentioned, I did get the gauge originally on the US 6 without washing, but once I blocked it, it did bloom quite a bit. So I actually sized down to a US 5 or 3.75mm needle. So slightly just slightly smaller, obviously a 1/4 mm, but it obviously made enough of a difference because the sweater ended up, you know, the correct size after all of the blooming of the sweater. And if you're not aware, blooming is when yarn, and it's typically animal fibers, but plant fibers can bloom as well. I've actually knit with a few cotton yarns that are minimally processed, and because they're so minimally processed, they actually do bloom quite a bit. So it's the sort of blooming is when a natural fiber, you know, especially if it's been minimally processed, once you wash it and it's had the opportunity to soak up all of that water and then ultimately dry and relax, the stitches will puff up. And in that process of the stitches puffing up, it could affect your gauge. So for instance, there have been times where I'm knitting something and it looks like it's going to be super airy gauge because I'm like, oh my gosh, but I'm like freaking out and I remind myself, no, this is going to be fine. It's going to bloom out. And then, you know, once you actually wash the fabric and those stitches relax, they kind of fill in the gaps. And then vice versa. There are times where you knit something and you're right on gauge and, you know, that those stitches puff up and then your item ends up being too big. So that is why it's important to wash your swatches. But yeah, as I mentioned, so this was on US 5, this was on US 7, and they give me a slightly different look. And I think that that kind of is how I also chose to style them. The pink version is a little bit more structured. It gives me a little bit more of like a formal look, if you will. And I chose to style that with one of my Oxfords underneath. And then that green one is just a very flowy, loosey, like sporty look. And I shouldn't say loosey, like it still fits me very well. They actually fit me exactly the same from a ease perspective. Obviously they measure exactly the same. It's just that the fabric and the drape of the fabric offer a different look. So with that, I'm going to show you all my final version, which again, I hadn't initially planned on having finished for this video. And I just finished in the nick of time, and it is completely finished. All my ends are woven in. However, it has not been blocked. So after I film this, I will be blocking it. I'll probably take a few days to actually get FO pictures and get those posted, but I will, like I mentioned, post my Ravelry project page so that you can see the modifications, and then ultimately when I post the pictures, you can see them there. And also I will post them on my socials. But this is going to be, I think, my last one of these for now. I definitely, as you can see, fell in love with the pattern. I think I've talked about this a little bit throughout my making journey this year. I have, over the past few years, been making a lot of things that are really beautiful, but not necessarily practical for me to wear in my everyday life, because I do work in a corporate law firm environment. And so this year I have been focusing on knitting more of those staples, and hence why I knit 3 of these sweaters, because they are definitely going to be like my everyday sweaters this winter. And so with that, and being a native New Yorker, I'm born and raised in New Jersey, but I live in New York, or I work in New York, and, you know, have sort of been in this area my whole life. I, of course, had to knit a black version. So, of course, this is not going to show up well for you all. It is just the nature of black, and you will have to just trust me on this. And as I mentioned this, I did finish it completely. All of my ends are woven in, but I did not, you know, block it yet. So it's still looking pretty wrinkly, as you can see. And actually, this is actually probably a good thing to show you all, which is like the wonders of blocking. And this is what it looks like unblocked and sort of wrinkly. And then this is what it looks like blocked and nice and, you know, even out and all of that kind of stuff. So blocking is a very magical thing. And so for this version, I used a Lang yarn Venus, and it is a cotton merino blend, and it is a chain net yarn, which I loved working with this yarn so much. And so this version I really see as being a true fall version, because it has that cotton merino, so it has a little bit of that cotton feel, where maybe my KFO will be more of like a late fall winter, and then also my Pearl Soho one will be a fall one as well, because that one is pretty airy. But for this version, I knit everything the same, including the body. So I shortened the body by knitting to 7 inches before the ribbing, and I did the 4 inches of ribbing. But when I was buying this yarn, since I had already knit this twice, I went off of my projects and not the recommended yardage in the pattern, and I must have done my math some kind of wonky, because I ended up playing and losing a game of yarn chicken. Well, I shouldn't even say losing, because I didn't even allow myself to lose. As I was knitting it, I realized I was not going to have enough yarn. As I sort of knit part of the first sleeve and weighed the yarn, I knew I wasn't going to have enough yarn to do full length sleeves, 2 of them, without ordering another ball of yarn, which I bought this yarn when we were out in Seattle, and, you know, buying just 1 ball of yarn and having it shipped across the country, I was just like, not going to do it. not going to deal with that. So I ended up modifying this one and knitting it to 3/4 length sleeves. And so I will include the modification information in my project notes, but the way that I did that was I knit for a few rounds even. So I knit for 4 rounds even after I picked back up the sleeve stitches. And then I decreased every ninth round, I should say, decreased every ninth round until, or a total of 7 times. And then I went into the ribbing and I did the 2.5 inches of ribbing. And so that's something that you kind of have to play around with if you are planning on shortening a pattern, is you kind of have to play around with how you want that. I actually knit the first sleeve, and then sort of saw where I wanted it to hit. I realized that I was kind of at that point, realized that I needed a couple more decreases to get to that point. So I ended up ripping the first sleeve back and then recalculating, like redoing my math and knitting it again. And then ultimately the second sleeve, I just knit to match the first one. And I think I have like 25 grams of yarn left. So I was definitely playing yarn chicken. I would not have been able to finish two full length sleeves with just 25 more grams of yarn. And so that is this version. So this version is more heavily modified than the other ones, because the other ones is just a matter of shortening the body and shortening the sleeves. This, I actually just completely reworked the sleeve to be 3/4 length. And so, as I mentioned, this is Lang Venus. The color is 4. So it is their black color. They don't have names for the colors. For this one, I actually thought I was going to get gauge on the US 6 finally, but I didn't. And that is because chainette yarns, if you've ever worked with a chainette yarn, do tend to spring. So you do tend to knit them a little bit tighter than a regularly spun yarn. So I did actually size up for this one. So I did size up to a US 7 or 4.5 millimeter needles for that one. And yeah, so it's not been blocked yet. I'm not going to have it blocked in pictures in time for this video to go live. So hopefully I will check back in actually in my monthly podcast, which I believe will be up about a week and a half after this video. I'll have those those pictures for you so that you all can see what that looks like finally worn and blocked. So definitely be sure to check into that podcast episode so that you can see the final product. So as I'm looking at my 3 beautiful sweaters here, I guess that is the end of the road with regard to my versions of the Hibernates. And we'll go ahead and talk about the testing experience for a little bit before we wrap up the video. Okay, so I did put out a video probably like 2 or 3 years ago now about just test knitting in general, that I'll go ahead and link in the eye up above for you all if you're interested in watching that and sort of figuring out how to get into test knitting. But in terms of the test knitting process for Aimee themselves, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to today, since that might be something that you're interested in. And I think that if you've been following me for a while, you have noticed that I have tested quite a few of their patterns, and even the ones that I have not tested, I do eventually knit. So one that I can think of off the top of my head, or 2 actually that I can think of off the top of my head that I didn't test but I have knit, are the Oolong Tank and the Campus Vest. So even if I don't always test for them, I do eventually sometimes knit the patterns. So there's that. So in terms of the testing process and how they put out calls or testing calls, they do offer priority to their members. So if you are enrolled in their membership, which I am, I do support their business, you do get priority testing. And so if you're part of their membership and a return tester, you will get that priority spot. You also, then they move on to the newsletter subscribers. So if you're not subscribed to their newsletter, definitely do so if you're interested in testing. Also, in general, their newsletters are just chock full of information, especially if you're someone who is really interested in learning how to make garments that fit you better and just becoming a better knitter. The content that they put out is absolutely amazing, and they don't spam you with tons of newsletters, which is really great. And then after that, if there are still spots available, which there usually are, so definitely don't think that if you have to sign up for the membership or something to be able to get a spot. And so sort of, that have that tier. So first membership subscribers, then newsletter subscribers, and then they'll put out an open test call for any of the remaining spots that are available. And there are usually multiple knitters for spots. So I don't think that I've ever seen any of their tests really fill up completely. So if there's someone that you're interested in testing for, definitely look out for their content. And also, the testing windows are always extremely generous, and this is because of the fact that they are truly passionate about their size inclusive mission and making sure that everyone who is able to join the test is able to finish the pattern regardless of your size, regardless of life situations. Sometimes life comes up and it doesn't matter that you're not a large size person. You may not be able to finish a pattern in a certain amount of time. And even if you don't finish the pattern for whatever reason, life gets in the way during that test period, you are still, compensated for testing the pattern once you do actually finally finish the pattern, even if you don't finish within that timeline. So I would say that the majority of the patterns have a 12-week window. So because they are a garment designer, some of the accessories will obviously have a shorter window. I think I recently test knit some socks and that was like a 6-week window or something like that, which is still ridiculously generous. But you can look for a standard sort of 12-week window for all of their garments. They do occasionally run return tester calls only. So if you are someone who's tested for them in the past, although I haven't seen one of those recently. The test itself is run via a Slack group, so you'll get access to the pattern, and then the Slack is actually broken out really well, where there is a chatter channel, and then there's the main channel where updates to the patterns are posted. So like if there are any issues with the patterns, you can post it to the main channel. Those are taken care of very quickly with a new version of the pattern. And then you can share things like the yarn you're going to use and, update pictures and all that kind of stuff in the chatter channel. They do ask that you check in about every 2 weeks or so just to make sure that you're still making progress. And then of course, if you're not able to make progress, you would let them know that you're not going to be able to meet the deadline. And to me, the tests really feel more like a knit along. You're getting a final version of the pattern. It is already in the final layout. It is fully tech edited. So when you are testing the pattern, you're essentially looking at the pattern the same exact way as, the final customer would be seeing the pattern. And then of course, even though the pattern is tech edited, there might be something that, is maybe off, or maybe you might find, confusing in terms of the way that they're writing something. So the instructions might be updated in a different way. So, and I think that that's something that is really important, and why they value not only having only repeat testers is because if you only have the same people sort of testing for you, they kind of get used to your writing style, and then maybe that doesn't necessarily work for everyone. So they're always looking for new testers. So be sure to sign up for their newsletter if that's something you're interested in. So I mentioned kind of they run it by Slack. You're getting a formatted, tech edited pattern. They do offer financial aid spots. So if you are someone who wants to test their patterns and are not able to buy yarn, either the recommended yarn or any yarn from their shop, there are financial aid available or spots available so that you will get full yarn support as well. And I believe that they usually reserve like two at the upper range, since obviously yarn gets very expensive, and then like one at the lower range or something like that. It ranges between, you know, pattern releases. So definitely if you're signed up for the newsletter, with each testing call, they will outline specifically like what the financial aid spots are available for that specific call. So if you're someone who you think that you might need financial aid, don't be, you know, sort of discouraged. Definitely sign up for their newsletter because those are available as well. In addition to the financial aid spots, they do offer a standard 20% yarn support off either the yarn that is recommended. So they'll usually collaborate with Yarn Dyer to provide that 20% off, or any yarn within their shop. So if you are buying yarn for the test, you will get a coupon code and you will get 20% off of that yarn from their site, if you choose to use yarn from their site. And then of course, like all pattern designers, they allow for basic modifications, shorten, lengthen as you need. And then they do allow for some more complex modifications on a case-by-case basis. You would just let them know. But you know, things like your bust darts, obviously, that's something that they actually ask for when they sort of gather the test applications. They'll ask you, do you think you need a bust dart? Do you think you need to lengthen, shorten, etc.? And part of that is that they actually do want representation across shapes. So they actually do look out for people who do want to modify the pattern beyond just, you know, your basic lengthening and shortening. As always, they're very responsive in the Slack group, in there multiple times a day. Also, members of the admin staff are in there as well, offering help, answering questions, offering feedback, advice. Like, you want to say like, hey, does this color work well? What do you think about this? What do you think about if I shorten it here? What do you think about if I shorten it there? You know, things like that. Very responsive, always answer within the Slack very quickly. And if there is a time period that they're going to be away, they will let everyone know so that, you know, you can expect slower responses. And yeah, as I'm looking at my notes, as I mentioned before, I think really the testing process really does feel more like a knit along, especially if you're a repeat tester. You get to know some of the people within the group and become very friendly with them. And it just becomes kind of like a group hangout as new testers join the group of return testers, you know, kind of welcome them into the fold. And everyone offers everyone encouragement and, you know, on color choices and all of that kind of stuff. It really is a really great community. And it's really great because not every single test has the same group of people. So you really do get to foster these friendships, not only with people that have tested over and over, but also with new testers that come into the group as well. And then lastly, compensation. And so I'll talk about what they're currently offering. So this isn't with regard to the past or the future, but this is what they're currently offering with regard to compensation. Outside of just the financial aid spots and the 20% yarn support for all testers, once you do finish the pattern, you do receive a final finished copy of the pattern delivered in your method of choice. So either through their web shop, through your email, or through Ravelry. So you can keep it in your Ravelry library. Like, I'm someone who likes to keep all of my patterns in my Ravelry library whenever possible. And then they do offer a $10 coupon, or, you know, gift certificate, I guess, for testing. And then in addition to that $10 gift certificate, and this is because they did recently open up the web shop, there is a coupon so that if you choose to use that $10 toward their patterns, you can get 2 patterns for free with that $10. Otherwise, you can just use the $10, gift certificate toward any items within their shop, whether it's yarns or tees or notions or anything like that the next time that you place an order, and those gift certificates don't expire. So yeah, that's a little bit about the testing process. I hope that you found that interesting in terms of that information in case you were ever looking to test for them or thinking about it and wondering what it was all about. And I hope that that made or help you make a decision should you choose to sign up for a test for them in the future. I guess one thing that I should probably say as I wrap up this video, especially because it is a video highlighting Aimee's patterns, and I've gone through not only the pattern in my makes, but also their testing process, is that I am doing this sort of just out of the love in my heart that I have for them. Yes, I have become very friendly with them and I consider them a friend as part of this process, but I was a customer first and then a tester and then a friend. So just want to put that out there and make sure that, anytime that I share anything, even if it is sponsored, I will let you all know, like, it is still sponsored, but it is my honest opinion. But I am not being asked to do this. I am not being paid to do this or in any way receiving any compensation. This is kind of just something that I wanted to put out because I'm really passionate about everything that Aimee does, but specifically this pattern, because I think you all can see that I've knit it 3 times in 3 months. I am so excited about this pattern, and I wanted to make sure that I shared it with you all because I think that everyone definitely needs a Hibernate pullover in their life. So that is all that I have for you all today. I think I rambled on for a bit longer than I originally intended to, as is usually the case. But I hope that you enjoyed today's video. As always, let me know what you have been working on or what you've been doing while you watch these videos. I know I'm not always knitting when I watch a podcast. Sometimes I'm sewing, or sometimes I'm cleaning or cooking or something like that. So let me know what you're up to while you watch these videos, especially if you made it all the way to the end. In terms of the channel, you will see me again in just under 2 weeks for the monthly project recap podcast. And so that's going to be on October 6th, a little late this month because as always, it's the first Sunday of every month. And so I will see you for that episode in just a couple of weeks' time. And I think that is all that I have for you. So as always, if you like this video, please be sure to do all the podcasty things, like, subscribe, click the bell icon so you're notified every single time I post a video. There's also always some information on how you can support the channel a little bit more in the description box if that's something that you choose to do, but just liking and commenting on these videos is plenty enough. And I will leave you here until the next one. Until then, be sure to take care of yourselves, your loved ones, and each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.